Hey everyone, we've got a brand new episode of In the Money with Amber Kanwar. In this episode, we're talking about investing in the space race. Now, you might think investing in space is for billionaires like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Richard Branson. But our next guest says this is a golden age of investing for retail investors in the space sector. We're going to talk about why that is with Justus Parmar of Fortuna Investments. So I hope you'll tune in. And for all those Trekkies out there, live long and prosper. The information provided in this podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute financial, investment, or professional advice. The views expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of any organization or company. The host and guests may maintain positions in any securities discussed on the podcast. Always consult a qualified financial advisor or professional before making any investment decisions. Investing with confidence starts with knowledge. This episode is sponsored by BMO InvestorLine, which offers a wealth of educational resources through their Investment Learning Center. Whether you're just starting out or looking to refine your strategies, the Learning Center can help you make informed decisions. Combine that with their easy-to-use platform and commission-free ETF trading, you'll be well on your way. Visit bmo.com/learning center to learn more. We've got Justus Parmar on the show of Fortuna Investments. And Justus, I think people think about space investing as just for billionaires. Is it still that way, or is it becoming more accessible and more of a viable business for people who don't have billions to burn?
I mean, what I will say is this. The space industry is very dynamic. There's a lot of nuances to it. There's a lot of things, going on within the industry that I'm sure we'll cover this morning. But some of those billionaires, I assume you mean Elon Musk. I assume you mean, Richard Branson. I assume you mean Jeff Bezos and folks like that. Every industry, every emerging industry, every burgeoning industry needs a couple real trailblazers, a real, folks that are cut from a different cloth, that are real visionaries, that transcend time, that are real revolutionary type of folks. And so I would unequivocally put Elon Musk in that category. If you listen to Jeff Bezos speak, he says, unlike Elon, he's not able to do 3, 4, 5 things at once. A guy like Jeff Bezos spent almost 30 years building a $2 trillion company called Amazon. He's no longer really involved with Amazon. He's really pushing Blue Origin forward. He recently just moved to my city of Miami here, not too far from my house, to be very close to and full-time with Blue Origin. So within that space industry, I mean, heck, Amber, if I could pick 2 people in the entire world to open up in an industry, I'd probably pick Elon Musk and I'd probably pick Jeff Bezos. So I think the industry is very lucky to have these 2 brilliant visionaries that are really starting to open up the industry.
But as I said, they've kind of got the billions to burn because they're leveraging off of businesses that they've already built. And the question becomes, for an everyday investor, is it viable yet to invest in these space-oriented companies and not expect, to be losing money for years to come?
So that typically has been the history, right? So I mean, that's the knock on the industry. The knock on the industry, I mean, twofold. One was you had governments really running the programs, right? So that's part one of the equation. And so I don't know if you've ever been to a DMV or anything kind of government related or watched new roads being paved. The efficiency might not be there the same way as it is in the private sector, right? And so when you had NASA, for example, like I'm down here in the U.S., I've got offices here in the U.S., I live and work down here, so I see things intimately well. And so with NASA, for example, when they were taking payload into outer space, it used to cost about $30,000 a kilogram 10 years ago, right? So a kilogram of matter goes into outer space. It's about $30,000 a kilogram. Elon now with his Falcon 9 rocket, he's brought that cost down 90% to about $3,000 a kilogram. You may have seen Amber with the new Starship rocket. That's the one that he's trying to get going. It's really big. I think it's actually deceptively crazy how big it is. Amber, it's bigger than the Statue of Liberty in New York. That's the sheer mass and magnitude of that rocket is unbelievable. And so we think he's going to have that up and operational maybe to the back half of this year, end of this year. And so the cost projection, once he gets that going, is going to be $300 a kilogram. I only say that because we came from an environment where it came from $30,000 with NASA, and now it's going to be $300 a kilogram to take things into outer space. It's going to become so cheap to take things into outer space. The possibilities are literally endless.
And what are we trying to do up there? Like, what are all the different categories of opportunities that are up there? Because there's everything from, kind of space tourism to satellites to Earth observation. So, can we distill it down to like, what are the categories of space investing?
Absolutely. And so you hit on, I guess, the first one, which is a tourism aspect. It is the great unknown. I think it's only something like 200 people have ever seen the Earth, not been in the Earth, but seen the Earth from the outside. Typically, those have all been NASA and Russian astronauts. Very, very difficult to get into. It's literally 1 in a million to go through those programs. And now with Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin, he's been doing a really good job. It's a private company. I think he's taken 9 different groups of people up, 4s and 6s of those. So it's the first kind of look, and that's where call it the billionaire kind of or somebody with a lot of means. I think the price points around $1 million to $2 million to take a magical journey that only lasts 10 to 15 minutes. But again, you're on a very, very short list of folks and people. I've throughout the course of my business and speaking at conferences and backing space companies, I've had a chance to really get to know a handful of astronauts. If you talk to these astronauts, it's really fascinating in the sense that they might not know each other, but they all describe it the same way. And what I mean by that meaning is that when you're out in outer space and you look backward and you see the Earth, your life's never the same, and your perspective of life totally changes. And so the fact that you don't have to spend 30 years in school and work your way up to government, and you can prospectively go up and take a look at the Earth and have this magical journey, that's pretty cool. And so I guess to answer your question, so you got the space tourism, which we kind of touched on a little bit. You've got obviously the satellite technologies. Before everything and wireless and communications, you would basically put like a cell phone tower. You put a tower up on a high building or in a mountain or things like that. It would send the frequency and the waves. That, I guess, is better than 100 years before that, horse and carriage and things like that. But in terms of technological advancements, it's just not there. And so that's why you see companies like Starlink and SpaceX, where they're putting these massive clusters of things. And so they'll directly put the rays down into remote areas. And heck, I think, Amber, you're in the GTA. I think if you go from Brampton to the GTA, you'll lose cell phone reception 2, 3, 4 times, which is pretty wild, and one of the biggest cities in North America. So that's all changing. It's all changing overnight. And so there's a lot of different unique aspects. There's a lot of things that are that are conceptual, that are not here yet. In terms of there's a lot of pharma activity going on. Pharmaceutical companies are putting things into outer space. Reason being
do
is
what?
I beg your pardon?
To do what?
So that on Earth there's gravity, right? So gravity keeps us, foundationally stuck to the Earth. In outer space, there's no gravity, and so I'm not a physicist or a scientist, but the essentially what they're looking to do is they're playing with these molecules and atoms because there's no gravity in outer space, and so they're doing all sorts of testing. They might find the cure of cancer or all sorts of things because the genetic disposition of these molecules is totally different in outer space. So we're just literally scratching the surface on this because, again, the baton's been passed from NASA to Jeff, Elon, a bunch of different, amazing folks that aren't even named Jeff and Elon. And so that we're still very, very early days. My last point is we're huge in energy. We're actually very big in nuclear energy at the moment. And so if you believe in AI, you understand that the need for energy has to grow exponentially. I'm down here in the U.S. I have a house in Los Angeles. I have an office in Los Angeles. In California, we have rolling blackouts during the summer and parts of the year. Texas as well. Our grid is totally tapped. And so we're always looking for cheap, clean energy. Obviously with the data centers and Bitcoin and crypto and AI and all these magical things that are going to, come in the not too distant future, we're always chasing energy. And so there's folks out there, there's companies out there that are, trying to harness the sun's energy. Obviously, we're doing this here on planet Earth, but if you understand science, when the sun's rays come down, it actually gets eaten up in the atmosphere. So we get a very distilled level of energy as it hits us, and it's good because we don't burn. We like to go outside. It's, it actually works for humanity. But from an energy perspective, imagining harnessing, plates and things that are up outside of the Earth's atmosphere that will just collect direct energy and sunlight. It'll be able to it'll be able to energize the Earth 10 times over. And so those are some of the really interesting, unique things that are kind of percolating in the background that I think in the, not too distant future, certainly in your lifetime and mine, we'll get a chance to see.
Well, and since this is an investable show, I mean, those sound like wild opportunities that investors want to participate in. And I guess that what brings you here is because this is kind of your playground. This is where you like to deploy dollars. Have you ever been up in space?
I have not, but I've actually been invited to. I thought about it very hard. Never say never. It sounds foolish, but I've got 2 very young kids at home. So I might want to see this thing kind of work itself through a little bit, instead of being on flight number 7, be on flight 2007 or something like that. But I think it's one of those things where it's hard to pass up, but I still want it to really get honed in a little bit better. But yeah.
Yeah, you'd really have to just take a serious, like, how worth it is it? I totally feel you. I've got young kids too, and I just don't know, would I risk it all? Just to have like kind of a cool view of the Earth. How did you get involved in space investing in general? And like, what's your process? Because I could get sucked into a lot of these stories that you just talked about, right? Inventing pharma out in space. Like, cool, I'm in, but you got to apply a discipline to this.
Yeah, and that's just it. And so, to be quite frank with you, I started my firm, Fortuna Investments, in 2015. I was a professional money manager for 13 years before that at some pretty big Canadian banks. So we really, I'd say, we made a name for ourselves in 2017-ish. And so what we did at that time, and Elon Musk then wasn't necessarily the rock star that he is now in a certain way, which sounds a little bit wild, but and I only say that because in 2017, Tesla was the number 1 shorted stock on the planet, meaning everybody that's betting on the stock thought it was going to zero. He was selling 20,000 cars a quarter, bleeding cash. It was not in the strong position that it is now. And so we took a hard look at Tesla, and we understood that it was kind of the eureka moment where it's like, hey, if this thing really takes off, that the lithium and the lithium batteries that are fueling these cars and technology, being the MacBooks and things like that, there's something here. So we founded a couple companies that one company went to over $1 billion on NASDAQ. Another company we sold in 2021 called Millennial Lithium to Lithium Americas for $460 million. So that really kind of put us on the map in a certain way. And so when we're flush, we're riding high, we're looking for, call it, the next thing. We looked at our friend Elon and said, well, what's this guy doing, right? And so we looked at what he's doing again. And so he's a really interesting guy, unique guy. I've had the chance to meet him a couple times very briefly. He's not doing things to buy fancy cars and houses and things like that. He's really, in my opinion, he's doing things for humanity. He's really pushing the boundaries of humanity. And so all of the things that he's doing, he's trying to gain as much resources as quick as he can to fund his space endeavor, because it's so expensive and so challenging. And so that's what makes him tick, right? And so within that, and as you start to really peel the layers of the onion back, it becomes, as I was alluding to earlier in the conversation, if you've got a guy like that, a visionary like that, really opening up an industry, I think there's something there. I think the $1 million or $1 billion question is like, what's investable, what is really there, and how do you, navigate these waters without, getting blown up, essentially. And so, the good thing about Elon and folks like that, he can't do it alone. He doesn't want to do it alone. He's got a, very competitive, nature, obviously, but by heart. Guys like Jeff Bezos, when you speak to them, again, he's built a $2 trillion company. He's full-time in space now. And so the best way I can articulate it is these folks like this, companies like this are laying the foundational pieces or kind of the railroad tracks into outer space, right? And so it's almost akin to, let's say 99 or 2000, early days in the internet. I'd say SpaceX is kind of like Google in a certain way, where we had the internet, it kind of worked, we didn't really know the capabilities, but then all of a sudden Netscape Navigator and then Google showed up, and it really tied the internet and the possibilities together. And so if you were to go back only 24 years, Amber, and say internet 2000, what's this thing going to look like? It was almost unfathomable that all the different advents and apps and the medium that I'm talking to you from a different country on this Zoom platform, that all the possibilities of the internet. And so I think space is almost like that in a way, where it's really hard to pin down exactly what the winners and losers are going to be, but it's certainly opening up, and that's what makes us so excited to be a part of this industry.
Yeah, and bringing the cost down is so crucial to that, right? Because then it's less expensive to start experimenting up there, right? It's like, when we first started doing GPS, did we know that Uber was going to come out of it, right? But you can't have Uber without GPS, but you might not have predicted that that's how that technology was going to be used. You mentioned Elon Musk a number of times. He's so controversial right now, and I think a lot of that halo effect of Elon Musk doing good for humanity might not necessarily be sticking as much as it did a couple of years ago. Like, are you still? It sounds like you're still kind of a fan of his work and his ultimate goals.
I think he's one of the great geniuses of our lifetime. I think he's an Albert Einstein of our generation. Is he out there? Absolutely. And again, it's not even his business life, his personal life, right? He doesn't believe in monogamy, different things like that. And a lot of things get, caught in the airwaves. I think he did a really good thing buying Twitter, just opening up free speech. I'm a huge free speech advocate. I think, having, independent journalists and different folks reporting on things is not a bad thing. I think he does a lot of things. I think he's built differently. I think he's purposely kind of put himself out there. Heck, he tweets 100 times a day about everything under the sun. And so, within that comes some good and obviously some bad. And so you've got to be able to filter out the noise from the good. And so what I would say about Elon is the companies that he's building are absolutely one of a kind. They're generational. They're world class. Everything what he's been able to do in Tesla. The Boring company is making some great headways. SpaceX, we're large SpaceX shareholders. It's now the most valuable private company in the world. It's a $360 billion company. We did 13 billion or so last year in revenue. He's cranking on all cylinders. I don't know if you've been following what he's been doing with Grok AI.
Yeah.
It's been a 6 or 8 month window. He's almost caught up to these people like OpenAI that have been there for 7 years and deployed billions and billions of dollars. And so from the business aspect alone, I just, it's hard not to cheer for him. It's hard not to really want him to succeed because he's really pushing the boundaries of what's possible in humanity and civilization.
What's with the obsession on Mars? What are we all going to do on Mars? Why do we need to get there?
You want to go? There was a good movie I watched the other day. It was called Interstellar. I recommend it. It's about 2.5 hours. It's a little bit long. But so Mars, he wants to take civilization to Mars because he's a student of history. And so if you look back in history, we've had, the Ice Age, dinosaurs go extinct. There's always, let's say, close calls with meteors hitting planet Earth. And so from a protectionism perspective or a human, longevity, surviving, humanity and continuing life for humans, he wants to take people to Mars. He wants to have a kind of a sheltered colony of sorts. We'll see how big or how far it kind of gets. If you end up having 8 billion people living up there, I might not be alive to see that. But the genesis of what he's trying to do is take civilization to Mars for no other reason than if anything, God forbid, were to happen to Earth, humans can survive and live on.
That's the vision and visionary, I guess, right? To be able to think that far beyond yourself and humanity. Great conversation on sort of the space industry and the characters behind it. Let's dip into the mailbag now. Okay, so Justus, you laid out sort of a great lay of the land in space investing. People want to know how they get involved. So we've got a question just about an ETF. And of course, there's an ETF for that, right? There's an ETF for everything. And this question is, what do you think about the ARC Space and Innovation ETF? Do you like it? Do you have a recommendation for another space ETF? Do you like these vehicles as getting broad exposure?
I mean, out of the universe, ironically, actually, I prefer the Cathie Wood's ARC. It's Cathie Wood's ARC, right? ARC X. I've met Cathie a couple times. I think she does a great job. She's also a visionary of sorts. She's an early Tesla backer, among other things. But the composition of the ARC ETF, I think is actually a quite good one. And I only say that because if you actually, it changes, but you got to pull the most recent one up is. So not only does it have the space companies, I think like Rocket Labs, which we've been out there kind of banging the drum on for the last year or so. So it's got the high octane kind of space stocks, but it also has, I believe, things like Facebook and Amazon and called Magnificent Seven technology companies that have been performing really well that are tied into outer space. So I think that's really interesting. That's really unique. And I believe the ArcX ETF that also has companies like Palantir and some defense Kronos, which is also very interesting, right? And so the dynamic here in the U.S., we're I mean that what we're witnessing is probably the most disruptive government that I've seen in my 42 years. They're really changing things up. It's the most tech administration that you'll ever probably see. You've got JD Vance from Founders Fund, who's a Peter Thiel guy. Obviously, Elon, as you mentioned earlier, is very close to the administration, clearly, as you can see. You've got a lot of David Sachs, who I know as well. And so you've got so many tech folks around there. And so I think net, that's going to be very good for defense in America. They're going to start shaving their budget. They're trying to save their budget, and they're trying to improve efficiencies. So that's really interesting tie into actually outer space. And I think it's actually a very good basket way to play the public space arena.
I think when we're talking about these broad ETFs that say they're about space, but then they've got Amazon in there, they've got Lockheed. I mean, those trade for different reasons, right? They're not really space stocks. Is that something investors should consider?
I mean, I would, right? I only say that because, look, the bottom line is space is extremely risky. It's very risky, but the payoff can be exponential as well, right? So it's not for the faint of heart. It's certainly not for everyone. And then again, the reason what we're talking about, I think ETFs is it is a basket approach, right? So the whole idea of a basket is to hedge yourself, to have a basket type of, risk mitigation profile. And so I really like the Cathie Wood ETF because, again, you absolutely unequivocally do get space, but you also get some Amazon. Amazon's also using space. They're tied in. It's not like some outlier like hotels. So it is in the same arena, same basket. But then you also have American defense and technology. We love American defense and technology. We love America. I think it's a great composition of such. I guess the only thing I'd be a little bit kind of weary about, I don't have it in front of me, but it's been performing exceptionally well. I think it's up almost 100% year over year. And so, much like anything, a lot of people are projecting a bit of a choppy year this year, where we've had exponential growth for the S&P 500 2 years in a row. We've had, the Magnificent Seven stocks do exceptionally well. And so people are projecting maybe some pullbacks throughout the year. So if you were looking at maybe stepping into something like that, I might be a little bit kind of mindful of how much it's already run over year.
Yeah, back to where it was back in 2021, which you can't say for the other ARC ETF, the innovation ETF. And I know she gets a lot of flack for that, but at least the space one has gone back to where it was in 2021. Let's get to our second question. This one's on Iridium Communications, maybe not a household name, but potential competitor to Starlink. And this one's down quite a bit from 2023. What should we know about Iridium Communications? And is this one you would take a look at?
I mean, so the tricky thing is, right, a lot of the stuff that we've talked about is a lot of the innovations in space, a lot of it, a good chunk of it, I'd say 80% of it, it's happening in private arenas, right? I mentioned Blue Origin, I mentioned SpaceX, we're shareholders of. Not everybody can get their hands on things like this. There's a whole laundry list of other companies. And so Iridium's interesting in the fact that it's a publicly traded satellite company. I think they've done a reasonably good job. It's not something that I'm an investor of or follow intimately well, but everything that I can understand about the company. It's got a good profile. They've got, I believe, 70 clusters of satellites around the world deploying high-speed internet and services. If you look at the world, the population of the world's growing, the technology is growing at a faster clip. We're using more and more broad wave and broadband technologies. So I think it's very, very interesting. I believe the analysts actually are quite favorable on the stock. That they're all, I mean, you can probably pull them up online. It's highly regarded, and they're called the streets perspective. But again, relative to, let's say, SpaceX and Starlink particularly, because SpaceX is the parent company. You've got the launch business, which is about 50% of their business, and then you have Starlink, which is about 50% of their business, give or take. And so if you do an apples to apples, I know it's hard to do an apples to apples comparison because you've got a private company and a public company, but just the genesis of the two companies, I'm biased. I'm a SpaceX shareholder, but I don't think you can compare the two if your dollars are absolute and you can only pick one. Reason being is that SpaceX is about half the price. It's about twice the speed. It's much more disruptive. You have
Do you
the
mean
horsepower.
Starlink? Do you
I
mean
beg your pardon?
Starlink? Do you
I
mean
mean, sorry,
Starlink? Yeah.
Starlink relative to, yeah, exactly.
Iridium, yeah.
Yeah. And so, because I mean, they're both satellite, launch cluster players providing broad wave. And so, if you just do a dollars to dollars kind of comparison, and if you could pick one, I would heavily lean to Starlink comparatively, but I know that's not possible because, again, Starlink is a private company and Iridium is a public player.
And it's not, it's not a money losing company, and it does share buybacks and it pays a dividend. So, we talk about the speculative nature of investing in space. This is doing a lot of those more mature, shareholder friendly sort of approaches, not one that you would think of like a high growth, money losing company.
It's, yeah, I mean, from every account, it's a very well run company. And again, look, if your belief in the world is like, hey, we need more internet. If you truly understand, there's not that many, space internet players, satellite players that can do it at a very high level that are publicly traded. I think that stock has room to grow over the next couple of years as long as it continues to be run quite well. My only caveat was if you were to compare it directly to Starlink, I would much rather take Starlink over Iridium for whatever it's worth.
Let's go to our third one. This is about Virgin Galactic. Is there any hope for Virgin Galactic? This is backed by Richard Branson. It is a very ugly chart. Investors have lost a lot of money on it. And I mean, we were talking about space tourism. That was sort of the promise of Virgin Galactic. How did it all go so south?
I mean, in the most simplistic form, they never got their technology. Their economies of scale never necessarily worked, and they never nailed their technology. Ironically, the sister company Virgin Orbit went bankrupt as well. It did a de-SPAC, and that one actually went to zero. And so I was actually put on the spot on a different show around this time last year on an American channel, and they really kind of put me on the spot, and they say, well, space sounds good. Give me your top space pick, and give me it was your bull and bear case scenario. And so, like a good Canadian, I answered the question. And so my bull pick in that arena was a company called Rocket Labs. It's up, from $3-4 a share to what, $24-25 a share. So it's up 800% since that recommendation. And my bear, and I'm not a negative person. I don't like to be bearish. I don't short stocks. I want everybody to succeed for whatever it's worth. It's just, and I feel for the Virgin Galactic employees in saying this, and my bear pick was Virgin Galactic last year. And I don't think things have changed that much. They're bleeding cash. If you actually look at the space arena of stocks, you look at Firefly, ASTS, you look at, Rocket Labs, you look at all their different arena of space stocks, they're up on average, lunar, intuitive machines, they're up about 400 to 800% year over year. Virgin Galactic hasn't moved. It's actually gone down. And so it's a function of a lot of different things. They're going to need tremendous amount of capital. They have something in their company called ATM, which basically is they keep financing at the cost of the market. If you understand the nuances of market theory, it just creates more and more shares in dilution. So it's going to be hard to, impossible to get the share price up. And I think that's why we generally buy equities to get an appreciation of stock price. So
and Richard Branson himself said he's going to stop funding the business. So that's why they have to go out, right? And sell their own shares to raise money for their business.
That's exactly right. And so, he's obviously a billionaire. He doesn't have unlimited funds. He might see something we don't necessarily see. But and again, like I feel more for the brilliant people within the company and the workers and folks like that. And again, I don't mean to be bearish or, again, if I had money, which I do have, and I wouldn't necessarily put it on Virgin Galactic. I'd stay away until they're able to actually execute on some of these things they've been planning for 3, 4, 5 years.
Justice, your Canadian is showing. You're so apologetic about this short.
I'm working on it. All
right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll get to more of your questions. Okay, and we're back. We've got more questions in the mailbag before we get to Pro Picks. This one is about Boeing. Obviously, Boeing's got a whole bunch of other issues that it's dealing with right now, but it does have some space exposure. Shares are down over the last 5 years, and the company recently posted its second biggest annual loss ever. Do you think it can recover? And my question is, do you look at it as a space stock?
I look at it as a legacy stock, right? And so I'm not huge on legacy players, right? I'm sure they're fine. They're fine in pension funds or wherever, whoever buys these things. But the genesis of my VC firm and my investment, mentality isn't to necessarily buy the legacy players. I don't buy the Lockheed Martins. I'd stay away from the Boeings. I'd stay away from Ford. I'd stay away from GM. I'd stay away from all these things. And it's not that they're not great companies. I just think there's better companies out there. And so you get a snapshot of basically how inefficiently or poorly they're run when, if you look at Boeing's history, right? Take a look at Boeing, right? So they've had all the airline crashes, the MAX disasters, which they've been trying to deal with for over the course of a handful of years. So much so it cost the last CEO his job. They've got the Starliner space program that's billions and billions of dollars over budget. They couldn't even do what they wanted to do. If you, I don't know if you've been following, but they took 2 astronauts to outer space. As stupid as it sounds, they took them up and they can't bring them back down. Elon,
Still, they can't bring them back down.
They're stuck. They've been stuck for 4 months, and Elon Musk.
How are they surviving?
Elon Musk's going to bring them down in the next 30 days or so. He's hoping to. So disaster is an understatement in terms of their space program. And again, I don't necessarily blame the nuances of their company, but what I do know, I'm a businessman. I've done very well in my life, and when the companies become old and kind of bloated and they stop innovating, it turns into a different animal. And I generally want to stay away from companies like that because you don't know how many problems exist within there when you start opening up the hood and peeling back the layers of those onions. And so it hasn't been a well-run company. This Kelly Ortberg, who seems like a good CEO, he's actually found himself in the crosshairs of President Trump, ironically, in the last 30 or 60 days. Not for the reasons you would think, mainly because in President Trump's first administration, he wanted a brand new Air Force One, a Boeing plane. And so he ordered the plane in his first administration, maybe not expecting he would win this cycle, but he basically showed up and he said, "Where's my plane?" And he realized, wow, this thing's billions of dollars over budget, 8 years behind schedule. He goes, "This is absolutely crazy." So ironically, he's got Elon Musk kind of going and overseeing Boeing's work now. I don't necessarily think for manufacturing of different things for the economy. I actually personally think it's more so to do with he wants his plane. And so, it's a very, you don't want to be in the crosshairs of some of these folks, right? Because they have the power to really slow your business down and, award government contracts to other folks. The one thing that I think we've all collectively seen, and you see it in defense, where companies like Palantir is worth more than Lockheed Martin. I mean, that Palantir stock has been on a rocket ride. And it's because people are realizing, wow, all this government waste, this new administration is not going to kind of play into this. Just because we've been giving them massive contracts doesn't mean that we're going to continue to do so. And I think that's a result of all the tech folks and the disruptors that are in this administration. So a lot of the capital is actually leaving those kind of very, very stable government contractor type of companies to, hey, we can do things quicker, faster, cheaper, more safe. And that's why there's been a bit of a flight of capital into some more of these disruptive companies like Palantir, Anduril, and the likes thereof.
Think of that move in Palantir. It's so controversial because it's ripped and then it pulled back. But it's such an expensive stock. And that's where people hate it, right? That's where they really focus. What do you think of that? Because, part of what brought you into this space was like Tesla. It was so hated. So it seems like you don't necessarily shy away just because something's really hated. What's your 2 cents on the Palantir situation?
My hot take is, and again, I had the same kind of spidey senses where something's run from $20 to $100. It's like, how do I justify buying this thing? Again, my background in portfolio management, usually we buy half. If we want to buy it, we'll buy half. If it does exceptionally well, I think we do really well. But obviously, if it comes back hard, you kind of deploy the other half of the capital in terms of a kind of a buy-in to the stock. What I will say is, we're not traders. I don't know how to trade stocks. I may as well go to the casino. We don't write calls or options and things like that. We're not gamblers in that sense. We look at the fundamental value of companies. We look at the 4 or 5 year time horizon of the sector that the company's in. and we try and make a calculated bet or judgment on, is this company going to be a winner over a 5-year period of time? Anything over 5 years, the crystal ball is very murky. There's too many variables at play. I can't see that clearly. And then again, anything less than a year or maybe even 2, who knows, right? You're kind of gambling at that perspective. And so for those reasons, I actually like Palantir, as crazy as it sounds. I know it's rich. I know it's insanely expensive. But again, if you take a huge step back and you understand that the setup, and again, the setup is money's going away from Lockheed, money's going away from Boeing. They're old legacy companies. They're not going bankrupt, but the flow of funds is totally changing. And I wouldn't have the same commentary if the new administration in the U.S. wasn't in power. If it was the existing administration, I wouldn't necessarily buy Palantir because I don't think they wouldn't get any traction. I think they'd get blackballed, to be very frank with you. But I think because of the disposition of the folks around the administration, how pro-technology, Joe Lonsdale, all these folks are, I think they're going to push to try and make that company work. I think the trick is going to come because they're so disruptive. They're doing a lot of stuff with drones, and it's the opposite of long stability. It's like kind of break things, move quickly. The trick is going to come when inevitably some things are going to break. And does the stock break down? Do the government contracts dry up, or is there enough kind of horsepower and push behind it where it's like, it's a course of standard business, and we're just going to continue to drive forward.
Well, they've got a CEO that, really likes to push forward and likes to tell it as he sees it. So certainly not a quitter there. Let's get in our last question before we go to Pro Picks. This one's about MDA Space. We've gotten this whole segment, 2 Canadians, and we haven't talked about MDA Space, which is our, probably the biggest exposure you could get in Canada, formerly known as McDonald Detweiler. It has ripped over the last year. It's down 17% so far in 2025. Earth observation, so it plays in that sort of satellite space. Do you like MDA?
I'm a little bit biased in the sense that I've transitioned. I'm born and raised in Canada, as you alluded to. I've been a great money manager for many years up there, but I've transitioned my business to the U.S. 3-4 years ago. My firm, Fortuna Investments, we promote and develop American companies, American exceptionalism, ingenuity, things that are great for the American people. And as such, we've just gravitated towards the American ecosystem and the American space stock. So I'll give that sort of cover or asterisk on the commentary. But I think they got a huge contract. They got a $1 billion contract. I think the Canadian government's going to continue to support them. I think if you have Canadian dollars, you don't have to worry about exchanging Canadian dollars to US dollars. I know it's at a 25-year low.
Let's pick up on that point, though. You're Canadian, you've gone to the U.S., and you're all in on American exceptionalism. I wonder if that's going to penalize MDA, regardless of their technology and their ability. Could they be dented by USA? Could they be forced to expand, more in the U.S.? Are tariffs and issues? I just wonder if, like all of those issues, with Canada and the U.S. relations being what they are right now, regardless of what the company is doing, that's why you're maybe, to use your words, indifferent.
Yeah, and I think that's why you're such a great interviewer. That's why you're such a great host. It's a brilliant thing to kind of pick up on and kind of pull the string a little bit further. And so, a couple of things are at play, right? And so, like, I know the Canadian environment exceptionally well. I spent 40 years of my life there. Like, I get it. So the Canadian investors are in a little bit of a tough situation, in my opinion, right? You've got a lame duck prime minister who doesn't want to leave, who's going to kind of get pushed out. He's still meddling around. You're going to have this weird in-between period where the Liberal Party is going to get crushed. And then inevitably at some point in time, Pierre Poilievre will be the Prime Minister of Canada. It's a lock. It's 100% certainty, right? So what's going to happen is we're going to have to wait 4, 5, 6 months for that process to run its course. And so what I've seen down here firsthand in the last, let's say, 6 months since the elections happened and the new administrations come down here, the American exceptionalism, the American, support for onshoring. I mean, it's the most pro-America administration I've ever seen in my entire life. And these are not stupid people. They are very, very, very capable people that are really making a lot of noise. And they're not just making a lot of noise, they're executing very quickly. I'd argue the new administration's done more in the last 30 days than the last administration did over 4 years. And there's some really, it's controversial stuff, but the country's, it runs a $2 trillion deficit. Us in America have a $36 trillion deficit. These numbers are not sustainable, right? So they're cutting everything and anything they can to ensure the success of the long-term success of the empire, right? So that's the stuff that's happening down here. And so, the other facts that you can't dispute are America's the largest economy in the world. It's the greatest superpower in the world. It's the strongest country we've ever seen in our lifetime for a lot of different reasons, including those metrics. And so where does that put Canada, right? And so Canada's a little bit on the outside looking in. What I do think is the new administration is really going to help Canada. I think the new administration, the Conservative government, I think the pendulum swung way too far one side. I think it's going to be very refreshing to go the other way. I'm a little bit biased because I do support the Conservative government up there. I think they're going to be very good for business, meaning that I think Pierre Poilievre's underreported, that I think he's going to really open up the mining and oil and gas business that's really been choked for the last 10 years. And so, as you mentioned before, there's a lot of these tariffs and things that are being, flung back and forth. And I think it's actually going to set Canada up in a lot stronger position. And so if I had Canadian dollars and I was a Canadian, I'd buy Canada. I'd be a little bit patient. I know this is coming. I think there's a tremendous amount of value there. And I would actually literally buy Canada. That said, just because Canada does well and bounces back, it doesn't make it the best investment out there. I actually think that the American economy, the American GDP, what they're doing down here is going to even outperform Canada. So it's kind of picking between two. I mean, if I in a perfect world, I'd buy some Canada, I'd buy the US, but I think over the next handful of years, we have a very, very bright, robust economic future.
All right, that's a great note to end on. Let's get into your pro picks. These are pro picks coming from Justus Parmar, Fortuna Investments, and this segment is brought to you by ATB Financial. With $62 billion in assets, ATB Financial is powering possibilities for more than 820,000 financial services clients in Alberta and beyond. ATB's capital markets arm is a full-service investment dealer that offers investment and corporate banking, sales and trading, institutional research, and risk management. Visit atb.com/inthemoney for more information. Okay, Justus, you talked a lot about Elon Musk, so is it any surprise that your first pick is Tesla? And I think the timing is really interesting because obviously Tesla really ran after the U.S. election. Now it's come down. It's actually down in 2025. Why would you add to Tesla here?
I mean, look, I think Tesla, it's a super company. It's a generational company. We at Fortuna, we don't invest for the long term or short term. We invest for the long term. So I guess the commentary on Tesla is a couple things. One, Elon gets a lot of noise. I think he attracts a lot of noise. It's always what's going on. And that actually reflects into the stock too. Is the stock up? I mean, it's kind of a meme stock sometimes. It's doing a lot of different things at once. And so I just want to, I guess, preface it with, this is a long-term perspective. It's a bit of a contrarian perspective in the sense that I have no idea if it's going from 300 to 400 before it goes to 250 to 600 or 700, right? So what the crystal ball does tell me, or the tea leaves say, is that it's a very, very well-run company. I know there's a lot of dissident shareholders saying, well, he's not really running the company, he's running three others, and he's stuck in the administration, and all sorts of crazy things are happening. I'd put that all to the side. The company is very well run. I think they had a little bit of a disappointing quarter where their sales weren't necessarily where they should be. There's a Chinese company, BYD, that's doing exceptionally well. I mean, so there's a lot of things at play here. But when you look at the long-term viability of the company, here's a couple facts that are undisputable, in my opinion. And so they're going to have FSD, self-driving cars. They're going to start charging for self-driving cars in Austin, Texas in June of this year. He's got 5 million cars on the road, right? He's going to start charging $100 a car. Obviously, not every single person is going to take it on, but you start to see some of the things that are in the background that aren't really visible over the next couple of years, right? And so when you look at Tesla comparatively to any other car company or even company out there, they're not doing anything that, like, he's one in a billion. Like this Tesla is a generational company, and they've got such a moat around their business. And the self-driving cars, when fully implemented, it's going to be a game changer. It's going to be a re-rating for the stock. The revenue profile is going to change. The dynamic of the company is going to change, which is going to happen in the midterm, let's say. In the longer term behind that, you've got the Optimus robots. We're very keen on AI and robotics. And so you might have seen quite recently, he did a little snap show in Hollywood, California, where they're kind of functioning, kind of not. So they're not perfected. I think it's going to take a year or maybe two to get perfected. But the goal is to have 8 billion robots out there taking out our garbage, doing different things, assembly lines, at the price of a car, $30,000 a year. You can probably amortize it over 5 or 7, just like buying a car. And that's the goal. And so this is not a guy that you bet against. He's pretty much been able to achieve all the things that he's been trying to do within the company. And so when you have a company like that, and it's a $350 stock or $1 trillion company, you add those two elements in there. I cannot see a world where that's not a 3, 5, $10 trillion company over the long term. And for those reasons is why I and Fortuna are so bullish.
All right. That hits back at a lot of the bearish thoughts. And it sounds like you're less concerned about the auto sales now and more looking about what they could be if they're able to hit their deadlines or move towards what they're trying to do with fully self-driving and eventually robots, which feels like such a wild statement to say. But that's why you're looking forward. Okay, your second pick is uranium energy. And this one has pulled back actually quite sharply in 2025. People are very excited generally about uranium because you need it to fuel nuclear, and you need nuclear to fuel all the AI investments. So that's why we should be excited about it. But then the stock has pulled back.
Yeah, so it's a super interesting setup, and that's actually partially why I like it. Some of the reasons that you alluded to. Of course, like AI gets a lot of the buzzwords. It gets a lot of attention, and it's not that it's not unwarranted, because again, they're going to need clean power running 24/7, running these data centers. But I don't necessarily think in the foreseeable future it's going to be that uranium demand that's going to be able to meet the AI. Over the next 10 years, absolutely. But in the interim, it's going to be LNG and even coal and different things like that that are really going to meet that need. But what the one thing that we do know with certainty within the uranium and nuclear business is that there's over 100 reactors going online in China. There's almost 100 reactors going online in India. Anytime, and this is the first time this stuff has happened in almost decades. And so what we're going to see is when a reactor goes online, that's going to sit there for 60, 70, 80 years. It's going to need a lot of uranium on the front end. But you're going to need that uranium over 60, 70, 80 years. And so when you go on the nuances of the setup, the uranium setup, there's a supply-demand shortage within there, based upon the reactors going online. So the AI stuff is all, I don't want to say gravy, but that's just icing on top. And so it's a really interesting setup. Obviously, if you believe in AI or reactors, I think it's, and again, I wouldn't be speaking like this if it was the previous administration or what's been happening in the EU and things like this, where in the EU, we took energy policy from a 14-year-old girl for some reason. I have no idea why. And it's worked out very poorly for a lot of the folks in a lot of countries there. We're in a totally different life. We're in a totally different administration. And so you really need to be hip and churn to understand what's going on. And again, we've got an American government that's so pro-tech, so pro-nuclear. President Trump was on the Joe Rogan podcast earlier promoting nuclear and uranium. He's very, Elon as well. He flew to Fukushima after Fukushima disaster. He started eating carrots from the ground and drinking the water. This is 10 years ago, mind you. And so you look at all the folks around the administration, they're pro-tech, they're pro-nuclear. Chris Wright, who's the new energy secretary here, he had to resign his post at Oklo, which is Sam Altman's nuclear company. These are, whatever way you cut it, they're so pro-nuclear, so pro-uranium. The last point is again, we're very heavily biased towards American companies. In America here, we only produce 2 million pounds of uranium. We need 50 million pounds of uranium. It's a crazy setup. Amir's company, UEC, is going to have 2 mines going online this year in America. They're going to have a third mine going on next year. Unlike other uranium companies, it's unhedged, meaning that they haven't forward sold their production. So I think, look, if you believe in America, you believe in uranium, you believe in Amir and his executional capabilities, and you want the stock at a 40% discount, I think there's a lot to be very excited about in uranium energy.
And I guess the fact that you're picking an American one speaks to kind of your preference to remain in America, because of course we've got Cameco here, which is doing a lot more in terms of production volume. Your third one, and you alluded to this, is Rocket Lab. That was a big winner for you. It has come down a little bit. I'm sure you're still sitting on a really nice gain. What is Rocket Lab? Why do you feel comfortable adding here, or why would you? Because as I mentioned, even though it's pulled back like year over year, it's still up huge.
Yeah, so I don't want to be chastised saying buy this thing here, because again, it's up 800%. I don't, and in good conscience in a certain way, I wouldn't say, bet the farm on the thing, but what I will say is this: it's got a great profile. It does $100 million of revenue a quarter. It's not just the launch business. So they've successfully launched 60 rockets. So Elon Musk's 80% of the market here, but you can't buy the stock because it's private. So it's a good, public way. That's a company of Peter Beck, who I've got to know. He's a great CEO, great executor. He's been doing a lot of stuff in the launch business. But ironically, he's actually acquired a handful of companies over the years that are all space adjacent. So they're in the space supply chain. You cannot not work with Rocket Labs. He's almost immersed himself in the ecosystem. So it's not just the launch business. He's got a big market cap now, $8, $9, $10 billion on any given week or fluctuation. I like the fact that it's got billions of dollars of customer backlog. So it's got a healthy, order book behind it. What I don't necessarily love at this current moment, it's not a profitable company, right? And it ran so hard and so high. I mean, even higher than we kind of maybe expected in the velocity that it moved. I might wait for a financing or for something like that. I think they have $300 or $400 million of cash on their balance sheet. They burn cash. There might be an opportunity in and around a financing in maybe the not too distant future, where maybe that would be a better entry point. But again, if you're looking for a really swing for the fences type of opportunity that might be able to gain government contracts and continue to execute, I mean, that for a public company, that's the only way. That's the only company in the world, in my opinion, to play the sector.
All right. Super fascinating. I really learned a lot in this last hour. Thank you so much to Justus Parmar of Fortuna Investments for joining us. Thanks, Justus.
The pleasure is mine. I love your setup, Amber. I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much. It was great to have you on. And don't miss our next episode. We're going to bring it back down to earth. We're going to talk about real estate investing with Dean Arico of Middlefield. He specializes in those real estate investment trusts. Get your questions in now. You can hit us up anywhere on social media at In the Money Pod. You can also find us on our website, www.inthemoneypod.com. Email us at questions@inthemoneypod.com. And we'll catch you on the next episode.